Aditya Birla Group presents Budget 2015, the Make in India Budget, co-presented by SBI.
Well, we're continuing our budget coverage here on CNBC-TV 18. We're joined by the Chief Economic Advisor and the Finance Secretary. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC-TV 18. Mr. Subramanian, let me come to you first because, you were at great pains to say that we should not link the economic survey to the budget, but a lot of what you said in the economic survey has actually found its way into the budget, sir. So to start with, congratulations on that. And let me start with the issue of public investment because yes, sir.
So I said never discount the role of randomness.
Well, fine, point taken. But let me talk to you about the issue of public investment, because through the economic survey yesterday, you made a pitch for public investment. We've seen the government change the fiscal deficit number from 3.6% to 3.9% to give it some space to be able to up public investment. Do you believe that we are now likely to see the capex cycle, the investment cycle kick-starting? Because there are concerns on whether this is actually enough, because the share of capex has now gone up to 1.7% from 1.5%.
Yeah, I think, remember, the diagnosis for for about 6 months has been that private investment remains a little bit weak because, the PPP model has been, somewhat challenged. And that's why the need for public investment as a kind of interim measure to kickstart the process, not to supplant private investment in the long run, but just to play a kind of catalytic role. And I think this budget makes a move in that direction by increasing capital expenditure by about 70,000 crores. It's about 0.3% of GDP. And of course, it's one thing, we could debate whether the magnitudes are enough and whether relative to the size of the envelope and the constraints, whether, this was the right number or not. But generally, I think the direction is going there. Now, whether it will kickstart the capex cycle, depends a lot on, how quickly and how efficiently this money is invested.
Just taking that point on the efficient use of that money, and Finance Secretary, let me put that question to you, because there are question marks on when we are actually going to see the deployment of this additional 70,000 crore rupees. We've had the railway budget being presented. 40,000 of this 70,000 crore rupees is going to go towards the GBS for the railways. But how quickly can we really expect an economic lift on account of this additional spending on infrastructure?
Well, actually, I think there is no disagreement. I haven't had a single disagreement on the fact that we need to improve, say, both our road and our rail. And I think that's the whole idea of the public investment this time, is to concentrate on this and on irrigation. There are three core sectors that we want to really concentrate on, and it's an ongoing process. For example, the road sector in the last 9 months has signed up contracts, awarded contracts for 100,000 crore rupees. So obviously they are already on way and they'll need this money. Similarly, you've seen the rail budget and you've seen the ambitious target for strengthening the network there. So I think the money will be absorbed and absorbed well, because both these sectors also tend to use this money more efficiently than, say, others.
Okay. Mr. Subramanian, let me ask you this question as far as monetary easing is concerned, and then Finance Secretary, if you could comment as well on that, because the Reserve Bank has made it very clear that in terms of all the factors that it's looking at to decide its monetary easing, it is looking at fiscal consolidation as well. Do you believe that the Reserve Bank will take comfort from the quality of the fiscal consolidation roadmap that you've held out, or do you believe that in the short term, the kind of expectation that we have in terms of an aggressive monetary easing is perhaps going to have to wait? Mr. Subramanian, if you can answer that first.
Yeah, I think two things to keep in mind here, right? One is, the monetary policy decisions will also be determined by, the momentum on inflation going forward. And there our analysis is that, there's been a structural shift in the inflationary process, and we expect inflation to, be in the low fives going forward. So independently of anything that happens elsewhere, that opens up space for monetary policy easing. Then, of course, you get into what does fiscal policy do. And I think two things to note about the budget in that regard is that, first, I think there is fiscal consolidation, one. I think the magnitudes balance a number of factors. So the overall thrust of fiscal policy is, I think, in the right direction. And importantly, the quality of adjustment in this budget is actually in the direction that we all desire, which is that, reduce revenue expenditure and increase capital expenditure. So in that sense too, this budget represents an improvement. So magnitude, reconciling objectives, and the quality of fiscal adjustment, I think, are moving in the right direction.
So would you say then, Finance Secretary, that this does give the Reserve Bank room to act more aggressively on rates?
I don't want to talk about how RBI will look at it, but I can tell you that the fiscal consolidation is actually much better than a mere figure of 3.6 or 3.9 indicates. You must recollect, you must remember that we are, transferring a lot of resources to the states, which is, reducing our fiscal space. So the transfer to the states actually is going to be almost 1.2% of the GDP higher than last year, and that almost 1.2, 1.3% higher. So really speaking, not increasing the FD target, rather reducing it to 3.9, I think is extremely good fiscal consolidation, fiscal management. And I hope that people are looking at this picture, including the RBI, look that in spite of such, in these circumstances also, we are in the same direction for fiscal consolidation. The direction is not changed. It's just the timing which has changed from 2 years to 3 years.
Finance Secretary, if I can ask you a question, sir, because the market is somewhat surprised with the market borrowing figure, which has come in lower, and clearly you are factoring in things like asset sales and, of course, other receipts probably in order to be able to get to that lower market borrowing figure. Can you explain, throw some color and light on how you've been able to arrive at a lower market borrowing number, sir?
No, you're right. It's partly, the market borrowing is a percentage of the GDP. So GDP grows and you borrow what you can't raise from your own resources. So if your resources are looking good, then you need to borrow less. So obviously this is just it's a very arithmetical calculation of 3.6% of the expected GDP, which I think is in the region of 130 lakh crores.
Can
I could ask you a question on that? Yeah. Yes, please go ahead, sir.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Shereen, go ahead.
No, go ahead, sir. Complete the point.
No, I was just going to say that, there are two components. There's non-tax revenue and there's, disinvestment. On the non-tax revenue, actually, the projections are fairly conservative. In rupee terms, it's basically flat between last year and this year. So there is a kind of conservatism about the revenue projection there.
Right. Finance Secretary, a quick two questions related to the banking sector. One, of course, the fact that you've only allocated about 7,940 crore rupees towards PSU bank recapitalization, which is woefully short, but the hope is now that you will finally set up this autonomous bureau and then eventually a holding company. You're giving banks the leeway to raise funds in a manner in which they would like to. If you can throw some more color and light on the timeline that we're looking at, both in order for this bureau to be set up and be functioning, as well as the holding company structure that you believe will come into place after this interim structure is phased out, and also the composition of the Monetary Policy Committee and who will appoint the members. If you can share some light on that, please.
Okay, on banking, I think my colleague here, Dr. Subramanian, understands that better. But I'll just make one small point. and again quoting the finance minister, that that reforms and policies are an ongoing process, not a one-shot budgetary process. So the other thing about banks that you must not forget is that about a few months back, I think 3 months back, the government decided that the shareholding of the government in public sector banks would be allowed to come down to 52%, which is one other way of increasing the resources of these banks. On the Monetary Policy Committee, it is an issue that needs to be discussed widely, not only with RBI, but with all the stakeholders. And I think we will start the consultation process now. So what it will consist of exactly is not decided. It has to be decided after consultation, and which is why the finance minister said in his budget speech that within this year we will bring the act, and that involves, of course, stakeholder consultation. You want to add something?
All right, sir. Mr. Subramanian, would you like to add to that?
No, that's fine. No.
All right. My final question to the two of you, and Mr. Subramanian, let me start by asking you, because the survey had talked about the opportunity that the e-commerce space has thrown up, the potential of that e-commerce space in India, but unfortunately, we haven't really seen any forward movement on cleaning up the grey areas with regards to allowing FDI into B2C e-commerce. I'm not talking about multi-brand retail, I'm talking about B2C e-commerce. Do you believe that this is an opportunity that has been missed?
I'm not exactly an expert on this subject, so I'll pass on this question.
What is the question?
Yeah, I don't know what B2C. Do you have any specific sectors in mind? Because the FDI regime has been progressively liberalized across the board in the last few months. So I'm not sure what particular sector you have in mind.
There's an artificial distinction within the e-commerce space where B2C FDI is not allowed, B2B FDI is allowed. So I was just wondering if this was an opportunity to correct that and address this sector, because this is a growing sector and the government kept talking about the need to nurture and encourage entrepreneurship. Finance Secretary, would you have a view on this?
I have a view that you need to ask this question of Secretary DIPP. But I think the B2C question is a question which is closely related to FDI and multi-brand retail. So I think that you have to look at it in that perspective. But really, Arvind is right. Neither he nor I understand this very well. And you really need to ask Mr. Amitabh Kant to answer that question for you.
Okay. So let me leave the two of you with a final question. Finance Secretary, let me start by asking you, what's your mind are the big challenges? So far the external environment looks benign. So far, whether it's inflation or it's the deficits in India, we seem to be under control. Things like oil are under control. What to your mind could be the challenges, could be the risks to the kind of projections and estimates you've held out?
No, the downsides that are obviously very easy to identify is, say, some geopolitical developments which reverse the current decline in oil prices, or if the exact impact that the hike of interest rates by Fed Bank in USA can have. So those are downside risks. But I don't, there are upsides too. So there's a positive way to look at it. And upsides are that, the economy could do better than it is actually doing. It could actually see more tax buoyancy. So it's difficult to, predict the future. But on the whole, in any given situation, there would be risks, some of which can be identified and some which can't be. And there would be upsides. There also some of them can be identified. So on the balance, I hope that we are, not too unlucky.
Okay, Arvind Subramanian, I'll end it with you.
So I think,
Go ahead,
there are some external challenges, the Finance Secretary outlined some of them. The other, of course, is, turmoil in Greece, in the Eurozone, or, possibly the US Fed tightening could lead to some pressure on capital flows. But I think we're in a better situation to manage that than we were, say, 15, 16 months ago. I think that if you were to ask me what the real risk is or the real challenge is, I would say, it's mostly domestic and, the hard business of, implementation. I think Domestically, we have to implement, our projects, all the things that have been outlined in the budget. We need to follow up. So domestic implementation is going to be, I think, what's going to determine how much of the potential of this economy is going to be realized going forward.
I think you've captured the sentiment that we've heard across the board today in response to the kind of estimates that the budget is held at. But always a pleasure speaking with you, Arvind Subramanian and the Finance Secretary. Thank you so much for joining us here on CNBC-TV 18.
Aditya Birla Group presents Budget 2015, the Make in India Budget, co-presented by SBI.